The engine block sat in the corner of the lot like something the yard had simply forgotten to bury. Cast iron pre-emissions, the kind of unit that had last seen a timing belt sometime before the previous decade. It was coated in a film of old oil and surface rust, and one of the cylinder walls had a hairline fracture visible to anyone who looked, which was why no one had bought it. Diane Hartwell, CEO of Hartwell Motorsport Fabrication, looked at it for approximately 4 seconds. $50, she said, not to the man standing beside it, but to her assistant, Renata, as if the price were a joke she was telling at the block's expense. Take it. Somebody will buy it for a planner. The man she was dismissing was named Joel Carver. He ran a small engine shop out of a converted bay on the east side of Millhaven, a shop with a hand-painted sign and a parking lot that held 4 cars, if one of them was a compact. He wore a flannel shirt with grease on the left cuff and work boots that had been resoled twice. He did not look like someone who had spent 11 years as the lead engine builder for Vantage Motorsports championship program, where he had designed 2 patented combustion geometries and built the engine that won the Meridian Cup 3 consecutive years. He did not look like someone who had walked away from that career deliberately, quietly, because his daughter needed a father who came home every night and not one who traveled 40 weeks a year. He looked like a man who ran a small shop and paid his bills and didn't say much. Diane Hartwell did not know any of that. Say with this one, every number in it is there for a reason. Joel handed Diane $50 in cash, loaded the block into the bed of his truck without asking for help, and drove back to Millhaven. The truck was a 2009 F-150 with a cracked dashboard and a stuffed rabbit wedged between the seat and the console. His daughter Maisie's rabbit, named Clover, which she had placed there 3 months ago and which Joel had not moved, because Maisie said it was keeping him company on his drives. Clover was 7 years old, older than Maisie herself. Joel Carver was 39. His wife Claire had died 22 months earlier of cerebral aneurysm, sudden and total, on a Tuesday morning in February. He had been at the shop when it happened. He had not been there. That fact lived in him the way a structural crack lives in metal. Invisible from the outside, present in everything. The shop was called Carver Engine Service. It was not the kind of place people came to for speed. It was the kind of place they came to because their truck had 280,000 miles on it, and they could not afford a new one. Or because their car had been sitting for 3 years and they wanted it running again. Joel did not advertise. He did not have a website. He charged fairly, worked without shortcuts, and was usually booked 4 to 6 weeks out, which was enough. What people in Millhaven did not know, what most people anywhere did not know, was that the man who replaced their gaskets and checked their timing, he was the same man whose name appeared on U.S. Patent 9874s and 412, a combustion chamber geometry that had been licensed by 3 professional racing teams. They did not know that the framed photograph on the back wall of his shop, mostly hidden by the parts shelf, showed Joel Carver shaking hands with the director of competition at Vantage Motorsport after the 3rd consecutive Meridian Cup. They did not know because he had never mentioned it. Renata Solis had been Diane Hartwell's executive assistant for 4 years. She was 28, efficient, and had a habit of quietly researching things her employer dismissed. She had been standing 3 feet away when Diane made the planter comment. And something about the way the man in the flannel shirt loaded that engine block, unhurried, deliberate, with a precision that had nothing to do with the weight and everything to do with habit, had made her look twice. He had set the block into the truck bed with both hands placed symmetrically on the upper rail, lowering it in a single controlled motion without a grunt or a scrape. The way someone lowers something they understand, rather than something they are merely moving. She wrote his name down on the back of a business card from her jacket pocket. Joel Carver. She did not know yet what she would find, but she wrote it down. The block rode home in the truck bed, and Clover rode in the cab, and Maisie was waiting on the front steps when Joel pulled in, wearing her school backpack and holding Clover's twin, a second rabbit, identical, that she kept at home. She looked at the engine block in the truck bed with the same serious attention she gave everything. "Is it broken?" she asked. "It has a crack," Joel said. She considered this. "So it's like an egg?" He looked at her for a moment. "A little like that," he said. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Diane Hartwell ran Hartwell Motorsport Fabrication from a glass and steel building on the north end of the Mill Haven Industrial Corridor, 3 miles from Joel's shop. The building had a reception desk with fresh flowers and a client lounge with espresso equipment and framed photographs of race cars bearing the Hartwell logo. The company fabricated chassis components, roll cages, and suspension geometry for amateur and semi-professional racing teams across 3 regional circuits. It was a profitable business. Diane had built it from a smaller operation she had acquired a decade ago, and she ran it with the particular confidence of someone who had never been wrong in a way that cost her anything she could not absorb. She had been at the salvage lot that morning looking for surplus stock, and she had found the engine block, and she had found Joel Carver, and she had found the whole transaction mildly amusing. The man with the Resoled boots and the cracked truck buying a cursed block for $50. She mentioned it to her fabrication manager, Derek Sills, at their 11 o'clock meeting, and Derek laughed the way people laugh when they want to seem agreeable. "Probably use it for ballast," he said. Diane moved on to the procurement agenda. She did not think about Joel Carver again that day. She had a client lunch and a procurement call and a board review, and the engine block and the man who bought it receded to the category of things that were simply beneath consideration. She did not know that Joel had already set the block on his inspection bench, that he had taken a flashlight and a bore gauge to it within 20 minutes of arriving home, and that what he had found in those first 20 minutes had made him stand very still for a long moment, and then say nothing at all. The hairline fracture in the cylinder wall was real. It was also shallow, 0.03 inches, within the range of a sleeve repair if the surrounding material held. He checked the surrounding material with a dye-penetrant kit, working the fluid into the surface with a clean cotton rag and waiting the full 15 minutes before wiping it back. The rag came back clean. The block itself was a pre-production casting from a limited run, a variant that Vantage Motorsport had used in prototype testing 8 years ago. Joel knew this because he had specified the casting geometry himself. He recognized the foundry mark on the lower rail, a small diamond stamp that most machinists would not have known to look for, pressed into the iron at the base of the number 3 main web, faint with age but intact. The block had left Vantage's development program when the prototype series was discontinued, and it had moved through the secondary market for years, probably changing hands 3 or 4 times, each owner put off by the visible crack and the rust and the surface oxide that made the casting look older than it was. No one had looked past the surface. No one had looked long enough or carefully enough. Joel set down the flashlight. He looked at the block for a moment longer. Then he went inside and made dinner. Maisie ate her pasta and told him about a bird she had seen at recess. A very blue bird, she said. A very blue place it had come from, probably. Joel asked, "What kind of bird?" She said she didn't know, but it was very sure of itself. He nodded. After dinner, he helped her with her reading and put her to bed with Clover tucked under her arm. And then he went back to the shop and began making a list. The list was 2 pages long, handwritten, organized by sequence. Sleeve material, boring tolerances, deck surface inspection, head stud thread condition, main bearing clearances, oil, gallery flush and inspection, cam bore alignment. It was the kind of list that takes years to learn how to write. Not because the items are secret, but because the sequence matters. And knowing which sequence is correct is the thing that separates work from craft. Joel wrote it the way he always wrote such lists, quietly, without hurry. The shop smelled of iron and cutting oil and the faint residue of the dye-penetrant fluid, and the overhead fluorescent hummed at a frequency he had long since stopped hearing. He called his friend Marcus Deal the next morning. Marcus was a machinist who ran a one-man operation out of a rented bay in the next town over. A man who had worked with Joel briefly at Vantage before leaving to start his own shop. He was 51, lean, with hands that showed every decade of the work. The left index finger bent at the second knuckle from a press accident in 2009. The palms so calloused, they looked like a different material than skin. Joel told him what he had. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "The diamond stamp?" he said. "You sure?" Joel said he was sure. Marcus said he would come Saturday. He did not ask about the fee. The work began on a Thursday in the second week of October. The sleeve repair occupied the first 2 full days. Joel bored the damaged cylinder to accept a cast iron sleeve of his own specification, turned on the lathe in the rear bay to a wall thickness of 0.125 inches and an interference fit of 0.018 inches, tight enough to hold without adhesive, loose enough to account for thermal expansion at operating temperature. The lathe work alone took most of the first morning, Joel measuring the sleeve blank at 3 stations along its length before making a final pass, the cutting tool leaving a surface that caught the shop light in a single clean band rather than the scattered glint of a rougher finish. He pressed the sleeve in cold, using the hydraulic press in slow, even strokes, watching the resistance gauge climb steadily and stop at the number he expected. He measured the bore after seating, working the dial bore gauge in 3 planes at 2 depths, and found it within 0.002 inches of target across all 6 measurements. He wrote each number in his notebook without expression. Then he moved to the deck surface. The deck had a light warp, 0.006 inches across its length, the kind of distortion that accumulates over years of heat cycling. He set the block on the surface plate and measured it in a grid of 12 points, recording each figure with a depth micrometer, mapping the high and low zones before touching a cutting tool to anything. The mill pass removed 0 inches from the high side in 2 light cuts. The second pass at half the feed rate of the first and left the surface flat to within 0.5 inches, which was within Meridian Cup specification and well within what the head gasket required. He ran a precision straight edge across it in 4 directions afterward and saw nothing. That was the correct result. Marcus came on 3 separate Saturdays. He drove 40 minutes each way without being asked twice. And he brought his own measuring tools and a thermos of coffee that he refilled from the machine in Joel's shop without comment. On the second Saturday, he spent 6 hours chasing the head stud threads with a bottoming tap and a thread repair insert on the number 7 hole where the original threads had pulled, and measuring the main bearing bores with a bore micrometer at 4 positions each. When he found the number 4 main bore, sitting at the outer edge of tolerance, he said so plainly, reading the number aloud without drama, and they discussed it and decided to line hone the block rather than accept the measurement. The honing took most of the afternoon, the 2 men trading passes on the hone and measuring between each one, the shop filling with the smell of cutting oil and iron dust, and the faint sweetness of Marcus's coffee cooling in its thermos. When the number came back at 0.001 inches inside specification, Marcus wrote it in his own notebook and said nothing. The 2 men worked in the particular silence of people who have nothing to prove to each other. The main bearing clearances were measured on day 28 with plastic and then with a micrometer set, both methods confirming the same result, 0.0022 inches on every journal. Joel wrote the number down. Marcus nodded once. On day 31, Maisie came into the shop after school and sat on the stool near the parts shelf and watched Joel torque the head bolts in sequence. She held Clover in her lap and watched with the focused attention she brought to things she did not fully understand, but recognized as serious. The torque wrench clicked at each bolt in the pattern. Center out, alternating sides, 3 passes at increasing values. And the sound of each click was small and definite in the quiet of the shop. After a while, she said, "Is it getting better?" Joel said it was. She considered this. "Like when you fixed something that was sad," she said. He looked at her. "Something like that," he said. She nodded and went back to her homework, and the wrench clicked on, and the shop held the sound the way a room holds a note after the instrument has stopped. The engine ran for the first time on a Friday morning in the third week of November, 41 days after Joel had set it on the inspection bench. It ran at 6:47 in the morning, before Maisie was awake, before the first customer had pulled into the lot, before the day had asked anything of anyone. Joel stood at the bench with his hand resting flat on the block's upper rail and listened to it idle. The idle settled within 40 seconds to a steady 850 RPM, the oil pressure rising to 52 psi and holding, the coolant temperature climbing in a clean, even curve to 185 degrees and stabilizing there. The sound was even and low and without hesitation. Not a loud sound, a correct one. He stood with his palm on the rail for a full minute, feeling the vibration transmit through the iron into the bones of his hand, and he did not move until the oil temperature reached its operating band and the idle smoothed further into something that was almost lens. The external validation arrived not as a speech or a ceremony, but as a document. Robert Haynes was 67 years old, a retired competition engine inspector who had spent 22 years certifying power units for the Meridian Cup Series, before the sanctioning body restructured its technical division. He lived 40 miles north of Millhaven and was known in the narrow world of certified competition engine inspection as someone whose signature on a technical assessment carried the weight of a court record. Joel had called him on day 12. Haynes had said he would come when the work was done. He did not ask what the engine was. Joel told him anyway. There was a silence on the line. "The Vantage prototype casting?" Haynes said. "The diamond stamp?" Joel said yes. Haynes said he would come. He arrived on a Tuesday, driving a clean but aging Volvo, carrying a worn leather case that held instruments Joel recognized from a decade ago. He spent 4 hours with the engine. He measured. He documented. He ramped the engine through 4 load cycles, On the test stand, Joel had built into the rear bay, watching the oil pressure trace and the coolant temperature curve on a data logger he had wired himself, a unit salvaged from a decommissioned dyno cell and calibrated against a known reference the previous spring. Haynes watched the data without comment. He made notes in a small bound book with a mechanical pencil, filling 2 pages in his small, even hand. When he was finished, he sat down at the workbench and wrote his assessment by hand on the official form he carried in a separate folder, and he signed it, and he dated it, and he pressed his inspector's stamp into the lower right corner with the deliberate force of someone who understood what a stamp meant. The assessment certified the engine as a competition legal unit under Meridian Cup technical specifications, noted the prototype casting provenance, and recorded the bearing clearances, deck surface geometry, and the sleeve repair tolerances in 3 columns of precise figures. At the bottom, in the notes field, Haynes had written 1 additional line in his careful hand: original design, geometry intact, combustion chamber to patent specification 9874-412. He handed the document to Joel without ceremony. Joel read it once, folded it, and set it on the bench. "Thank you, Robert," he said. Haynes nodded. He packed his instruments into the worn leather case, closed the latches with the practiced motion of someone who had done it 10,000 times, and drove north, and the shop was quiet again. The document sat on the bench for 2 days before Joel did anything with it. He had a customer's transmission to assess and a fleet van with an overheating problem, and the work of the shop continued in its ordinary rhythm. He was not in a hurry. The engine was what it was. The paper confirmed what he had known since the first night, when he had stood with the flashlight and recognized the foundry mark and understood what he was holding. The document was not a surprise. It was a record. Renata Solis had not stopped researching. In the 6 weeks since the salvage lot, she had found the patent, found the Meridian Cup records, found a photograph in an archived trade publication showing Joel Carver at the Vantage workshop beside the engine that had won the 3rd consecutive championship. She had printed the photograph and placed it on Diane Hartwell's desk on a Monday morning without comment, alongside a printed copy of Patent 9874-412 and a 1-paragraph summary she had written herself. Diane had looked at the photograph for a long time. She had not said anything. She had picked up the patent document and read the abstract and set it down again. Then she had looked at the photograph once more, at the man in the workshop with his hand resting on the engine, and at the framed championship banner visible in the background, and at the expression on his face, which was the same expression he had worn at the salvage lot, the expression of someone who already knew the answer and was simply waiting for the question to catch up. Renata had already left the room. The Millhaven Regional Motorsport Expo ran every November in the convention annex attached to the industrial corridor's largest fabrication facility, 3 buildings down from Hartwell Motorsport. It was not a large event, 40-odd exhibitors, a mix of fabricators, suppliers, and independent builders, but it drew the regional circuit's team managers and procurement staff. And it was the kind of venue where reputations move quietly from table to table. Joel had not planned to exhibit. He had been asked by the event coordinator, a man named Gus Ferreira, who had been a customer for 11 years. And he had agreed because Gus had asked directly, and Joel did not refuse direct requests from people he respected. He brought the engine on a cart, set it on a plain steel stand at the end of the table, and placed Robert Haynes's certified assessment in a clear sleeve beside it. He did not make a sign. He did not print a brochure. The engine sat under the expo hall's fluorescent light, and the document sat beside it, and that was sufficient. Diane Hartwell walked past the table at 11:15 on the first morning of the expo. She was moving with the particular efficiency of someone working a room. Her assistant, Renata, 2 steps behind. She saw the engine. Before she saw the man, she stopped. The engine was the same block she had priced at $50 for a planner. It was not the same in any other way. The surface was clean and exact, the kind of clean that comes not from polish, but from precision. Every surface machined to a purpose, every edge intentional. The sleeve bore catching the fluorescent light in a way that a repaired surface should not be able to catch it, which meant the finish was correct to within fractions that the eye could not measure but could somehow register. She looked at it for longer than 4 seconds. Then she looked at the document in the clear sleeve. She read it. She read it again. Her eyes moved to the line at the bottom, the line about patent 908074-412. And she was still for a moment in the way that rapid internal calculation produces stillness. Joel was standing at the side of the table talking to a team manager from one of the regional circuits. Diane waited. When the conversation ended, she stepped forward. Her posture was the same as it always was, but her voice, when she spoke, was different. Not louder, nor softer. Measured in a way it had not been at the salvage lot, the way a person speaks when they have set aside what they intended to say and are choosing something more careful instead. I said something at the auction, she said, about the block. It was unkind. She did not add anything to that. She did not qualify it or expand it. She let it stand. Then she said that Hartwell Motorsport was building a new demonstration platform for the regional circuit season, and that they were looking for a builder whose work could be certified to Meridian Cup specification. She said she would like to have a conversation about whether that was something Joel would consider. Joel looked at her for a moment. His face was still. His hands were still. "I'll think about it," he said. He said it the way he said most things, evenly, without inflection, as a complete sentence that did not invite extension. Diane nodded once. She left. Derek Sills, her fabrication manager, had been standing 6 feet away during the exchange. And he left without speaking to Joel at all. and he did not come back. The engine sold that afternoon to a team manager named Calloway, who ran a 2-car program in the Northern Regional Circuit and who had read the Haynes assessment 3 times before making an offer. The number he offered was $4,200. Joel accepted without negotiation. It was a fair number. He loaded the empty cart into the truck and drove home through the early dark of late November, the heater running and Clover wedged in her place between the seat and the console, and the cab smelling of the coffee he had drunk that morning and the cold that had come in when he opened the door. Maisie was asleep when he arrived. He checked on her in the way fathers do, standing in the doorway for a moment, listening to her breathe, watching the small shape of her under the blanket with Clover tucked against her side. Then he went back through the kitchen and out to the shop and turned off the bench light, and the overhead and the garage light outside came on automatically as he pulled the door shut, throwing a rectangle of yellow across the cracked concrete of the lot. He stood there for a moment in the cold, not thinking about Diane Hartwell, not thinking about $4,000, thinking about the foundry mark on the lower rail, the small diamond stamp that everyone else had walked past for years, and about the fact that some things hold their value in silence and wait for someone who knows how to look. He went inside. The house was warm. The light in the kitchen window was on.